Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Sarah.
I just dropped my book.
Oh no.
Just threw it in there.
Totally scared you too.
Yeah,
Made you
I
jump.
jumped.
I'll let you get it in scene.
All right, hit me, producer Potts.
Are we just full of plastic? Can you give us the real tea on microplastics, please?
So there was a new study. If you had asked me this question a month ago, my answer would have probably been very different.
That's why I love science and why I love talking to you. Give us I'm really excited. Okay, let's go.
Okay, so let's define what microplastics are. So microplastics are plastic that is micro-sized. It's just very, very small. It's actually technically defined as particles of plastic less than 5 millimeters in diameter, but like all the way to microscopic, like less than a micron. So all the way to, I need a microscope to see how small this bit of plastic is. And microplastics are ubiquitously polluting our environment. They're everywhere. They're in our water. They're in the ocean. They're in the soil. They're everywhere. And they are in our bodies. And up until a month ago, in this new study, I would have been able to say, but we have no studies whatsoever showing that there is like a negative health impact from our current level of exposure to microplastics. This is a pollution problem that needs to be solved. Right now, we don't need to worry, but this is like something that could become a problem. There was a new study published in the New England Journal of Medicine last month that showed, so they were looking at people with microplastics in, I believe, like their arterial plaque. So like in the, like, you think clogged arteries. So like the gunk that clogs your arteries, they were looking at people who had microplastics in that gunk versus people who didn't. And the people who did had a much higher risk of bad, like cardiovascular, like having a stroke or a heart attack or death from any cause over the next, it was like a really short period, like 3 years or something, if I remember correctly. Like it was a fairly short follow-up time. It was a fairly small study. Bigger studies are needed. It does not, right? It's epidemiology. It doesn't establish a causal link. So there's not a, because the microplastics did this thing that caused this thing. So like causality is not established. It's just one study. It's not like, we don't want to be alarmist about one study, but it is the beginning, I think, of probably what will, over the next decade, be a growing body of scientific literature showing that higher levels of exposure do increase risk of some health problems. So I think that makes it more of an imperative to find solutions to plastic pollution, not just microplastic pollution comes from plastic pollution more broadly.
Right.
Only 9% of plastic is recycled, even though hypothetically a lot of it is recyclable. And a lot of it makes its way into the environment, not just, landfills. So yeah, I think this is a moment where us as humans need to think about the convenience that microplastics afford us, that plastics afford us, and what we could use instead of those plastics that helps to protect the environment and stops putting microplastics into it. All that being said, you did not ask this question, but I'm gonna go there anyway.
Well, I do have a follow-up question.
Okay, well, let's see if your follow-up question is where my brain is.
So, like, as an individual consumer, and putting all the plastic and the recycling to the side, right? Because I think that's a larger conversation. I think it depends on where you live. Like, there's a lot someone could go down the rabbit hole to figure out where their plastic is going when they're recycling. Like, putting all that aside, when we come back to the topic of food and nutrients, like, where is our biggest source of microplastics that we know from the scientific literature, so that we can at least try to reduce our exposure without falling down a rabbit hole of fear and avoiding everything because everything has microplastics, right? So where do we start from that perspective?
So our brains were going in the same place.
Haha.
So I think there's this fear. I mean, there's so many myths about seafood safety, right? Like fish and shellfish just can't catch a break. It's as soon as you bust one myth about seafood safety, there's like another one that comes along. I think people just want to be afraid of seafood. And I'm not entirely sure like what is like the underlying
It's
fear.
big red meat.
I guess so. Just to lay out a whole new let's just conspiracy theory there. It's there's something about, maybe it's because they're not cuddly. I don't know what it is. But people love to hate on seafood. So there's a lot of myths about seafood safety. And then the most recent one is microplastics, because there was a study, a survey type study. I can't remember, it published last year sometime, that like showed that there was microplastics in like all of the fish samples that they like had. So it was fish from lakes as well as from the ocean. But if you actually do the math, it's a fraction of the level of exposure of water. So our biggest source of microplastics is actually bottled water. That's the top. Tap water is a fraction of bottled water, and fish is a fraction of tap water. I actually have the numbers in my book. If you give me a second, I'll look them up.
Yeah, that would be great.
So the most pessimistic estimates of microplastic exposure from seafood consumption are about 5,400 particles per year from seafood, compared to 458,000 particles per year if you drink mainly tap water, and 3.5 million microplastic particles per year if you drink mainly bottled water.
Wow.
So a huge difference in how much we're getting exposed to from seafood. So not something to worry about seafood. Obviously, we still want to fix the microplastic pollution problem, but seafood is such a health promoting food. We don't want to be afraid of it. We want to consume more of it.
What about water filtration? Is that an option? Is there anything, or do we not have the technology to do that yet with the filtration systems we have? This is a tangent question that you might not know the answer to also. So
I mean,
I don't know.
The thing with water filtration is the different technologies can remove different size particles. So a simple activated carbon filter, like think a Brita type like water filter, is going to remove big particles and not small particles. Something like reverse osmosis is going to like nearly purify the water completely, right? So it's going to remove almost all of those. I would imagine it can remove things down to a micron, because it's going through, like if you think of the filter steps, it should be able to remove even that size of microplastic particle. So, certainly a, higher quality water filter would remove the majority of the microplastics from tap water. The bigger thing is, and this actually helps with the plastics pollution problem, because if we're getting it from plastic water bottles and only 9% of plastic water bottles are being recycled, it's probably not 9%, right? It's 9% for all plastics, and probably plastic water bottles are higher than that and bringing up the amount, right? Like
I would imagine
they probably have a higher likelihood of getting recycled than the average plastic container. But so let's say a quarter of them, like let's say they're like way higher than the average for plastic. Let's say a quarter of them are being recycled. That means 3/4 are not. So drinking water is exposing you to microplastics while also increasing the amount of plastic pollution in the environment, the amount of plastics in landfill fills. So, getting a reusable water bottle and filling it from water at home, or, lots of places now will have water filters where you can fill up a reusable water bottle.
Yeah.
That
helps both ways.
Both sides,
right.
yeah.
And if we can afford it, some fancy water filtration until the planet gets on board with fixing this problem, because it's a huge problem.
And a non-fancy one will still take out some of the particles, right? They'll still take out some of the bigger particles. So
okay.
Not non-fancy and more affordable is still a good
better than just the tap water.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Thank you so much for clearing that up. At the beginning of the conversation, I freaked out a little bit. Now towards the end, I feel better. I felt like I have some action steps. I know what
Yeah.
I can do. So that's really great. Where can we learn more information like this and keep up with these new studies that are coming out? And like, how do we keep up with all that with you?
So I try to talk about new research, especially like putting new studies when they like make the headlines and everybody's freaking out about it, and put it into context of the whole like body of scientific literature, which usually means whatever everyone's freaking out about, we don't actually need to freak out about, is typically where that word, it wasn't really true for this topic, but usually that's the way it goes. I try to do that here on social media. So subscribe, like, notifications, all that good jazz. But also my website, Nutrivore.com. There's lots. I mean, you could spend weeks there and not find every single article that's on that website right now. But there's a whole pile of different Q&A articles where I tackle these types of questions. And of course, I read from my book, Nutrivore, that has a, part of the seafood myth busting section talks about microplastics. Lots of other myths. Actually, chapter 10 is entirely dedicated to busting myths that make us afraid of food unnecessarily. So obviously my book is a great place to get more information too.